I don't rent to psychos.
Wacko. Nut job.
I can't work with him. He's a lunatic.
Stay away from her. She's crazy.
Maniac.
People with mental illness get called a lot of mean names. Considering 1 out of 5 Canadians experience some form of mental illness, we might have some more appropriate names to suggest.
So here's my question. My question is, how come when people have mental damage, it's always an act of imagination? How come every other organ in your body can get sick and you get sympathy except the brain?
When you've got a broken bone, you can see the x-ray, you can see that it's broken. When you've got to go in for psychiatrics, there's nothing that you can see. And I think so that because there's nothing that shows you what's really there, there's a lack of understanding.
So we know that recovery is possible, we know help is available, and yet as a society we often think about mental health differently than other forms of health.
We tend to think about the body and the mind being two different things. Now, why that is, I don't know. But we tend to think that mental stuff is over here and physical stuff is over here. And the reality is that that's just obviously not the case.
Stigma often occurs due to the media's negative portrayal of mental illnesses.
Brad loves to keep me on my toes. I've sent him tons of texts tonight and he hasn't responded. I know he's home. That's crazy, right?
The only ones that can beat a lie detector test are people that have like no conscience at all. Psychos, schizos.
These negative portrayals then affect the way we view and treat people with mental illnesses. What is mental illness?
Basically, what mental illness is when someone has exaggerated difficulties and it interferes with their daily living. So there's a difference between how people can feel down one day or worry. That wouldn't be a mental illness. It becomes a mental illness if it's so significant that they actually have trouble functioning in their day-to-day lives.
It is a health issue that exists just like medical issues. It often has a physical basis.
What is stigma?
Stigma exists in several different ways depending on where it's coming from.
Well, with mental health, a lot of people have only negative thoughts about it because they're scared of it and they have these ideas that are not based in reality.
It's maybe a false impression or judgment.
It's the perception that people with relation to mental illness, that they're different or somehow less than the average person.
What is the impact of stigma?
It makes people feel bad and it makes people feel like they are worse than they actually are. It's a barrier for either the client with mental illness to find a job, to get back, to get involved in the community, to find an apartment.
The stigma of mental health stops people from becoming professionals in mental health, and then that affects patient care because we actually don't ever have enough professionals in mental health.
There is fear of judgment, there is fear of what people will think of them, and so it often will produce a sense of shame, or there may be prioritization of them as not being as critical or as serious as more medical issues.
Stigma, at the end of the day, it prevents people from getting the help that they need because they're scared of all the judgment.
So if there's a place that does housing for mental health, they might not want to live there because they don't want people to know that that's the mental health house. A lot of them live on the street because they don't want to be related to that, and they want to be around people who understand what they're going through.
The person with mental illness getting on a bus, having to sit alone while everybody else sits together. It doesn't matter what it is, you can pick any situation you want and you will recognize the stigma. I've seen people cross the street because a guy's kind of walking a little funny, or he looks a little funny, whatever. So everywhere, everything in society is affected by the stigma.
How can stigma be reduced?
A lot of that is due to media, stuff like that. I think some of that has to be toned down, explained, educated.
Education, and as well as more, getting more involved with the community. So stop putting people with mental illness aside.
Getting the word out about mental illness and treating it a mental illness like any other illness. No one is going to judge you for getting chemotherapy. If someone had cancer, then why is there a judgment for seeing a counselor and getting medication if you need it?
We have to integrate our mental health services into the community as well, so that people don't feel that it's something that they don't want to go near, and they can be more comfortable with it. So increasing awareness and education to people that mental health is not as scary as they think it is.
A lot of people just call people names or say bad words, but they don't really understand what's going on. They don't know what it is. So I think educating is huge, and having a foundation that supports that and supports mental illness.
And I think it really starts like at the kind of high school level, where you can start to understand these things. The change starts from there, and then when you're an adult, and when that generation becomes an adult, then the stigma is going to start to get reduced.
I think that when we reduce prejudice, when we reduce preconceived ideas, when we educate, that goes far to changing how people respond. And I think also when folks have mental illness, to maybe be less fearful around sharing that with their own close community, the people that are their supports.
That exposure to people with mental illness, so that people can understand that underneath that strange look, distant stare, there is a human being, and typically they're suffering, and the stigma just amplifies that.
The fear of being labeled by society often stops people from seeking help. In fact, only 1 in 3 people with a mental illness report that they have sought and received treatment. Be aware of stigmatizing material. Listen to people who have experienced mental illness. Be supportive. Educate yourself. Speak openly about mental illness. Watch your language.